I knew without a doubt in my mind that God was real, but it was that I didn't want him. I didn't want a relationship with him. It really hurt because so much of my life was built around faith in God.
Welcome to Grief City.
Don't know how we ended up here. Blue sky, sunshine, it was all clear. I'm surrounded by all my worst fears. Yeah, it feels like a ghost
And
town.
remember, if this is your first visit, you are not alone.
Hey, and welcome to the Grief City podcast. I'm your host, Nuella, and I am so very thankful to have you here. So we are in season 2. We're soon coming to a close of it. But before season 2, I wasn't doing podcasts and seasons. And so there's technically not a season 1, but I'm like, okay, this is season 2. We're starting fresh. And I was just doing them like every week. And then I took a long pause because I realized like, man, this is weighing heavy on me talking about grief. And it was good because I needed that season of just allowing my heart to heal even more. And there were definitely some heavy things I personally just needed to work through. But anyways, this season 2, has been the first season that I have had guests on the podcast and been doing interviews, and that's been so fun and just expanding like my knowledge, and just hearing different people's stories about grief and loss. It's just so eye-opening, and it's also encouraging to see other people that like how they've experienced healing and how they're living out their life, honoring their loved ones. So it's been really cool to see. A reoccurring theme that has been coming up is faith after loss. So I've gotten to interview people and talk to them about their faith journey after loss. And I've talked about mine a bit here and there. I especially touched on it, I would say, in the guilt and grief episode. That was the hardest episode for me to record to date. But anyways, that aside, I talked about my faith a bit in there. But I wanted to do a episode, just myself, sharing in more detail about faith after loss and just my experience with it, my perspective on it. And I hope it can be of encouragement to you if you're struggling with that. And I think there's a lot of resources out there on faith after loss, or even like supernatural kinds of things after loss that aren't even necessarily based like a faith-based kind of thing. But I wanted to share my experience, my story, because I kind of feel like there's not enough on faith after loss. And one, I feel like Christians, and this isn't all Christians, but I think a lot of times they don't know what to do when someone in their congregation loses a loved one. They don't really know how to support them well, unless, of course, they've experienced loss. Then usually those are the people that know how to support another griever well. But sometimes I'm even finding, like, even if they have experienced loss, they still don't know. And I think a lot of people that have faith or have had faith but maybe lost it after they lost a loved one feel like a lot of stuff with faith is like feel-good phrases and scriptures being thrown at you, which when you are in the depths of loss and hurt and pain, like, it's really not encouraging at all. So I wanted to share my faith journey, my experience with you. And I mean, really, this just boils down to losing my father has been such a big part of my testimony as a believer of Jesus. So I wanted to just share this story with you. faith was always a very important thing in my parents' lives. So I was raised in this small Methodist church in a tiny town in Pennsylvania. And I was raised in that church from the time I was in the womb until I graduated and then went off to college and moved away. So I've always known a life with faith. It's always been integral in my day-to-day life. When I was 7 years old, I think I was at this like night service at our church. I don't know if it was some like special kind of service. I don't honestly remember many of the details, but I remember someone getting up on the stage and giving the opportunity for like an altar call. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically this invitation to, you could either go up to the altar in the church or, you could stay in your seat, but it's this invitation to just open your heart up to God. Come to him, whatever your needs are, ask him for his help. It's just an encouragement to invite God in to whatever's going on in your life. And as soon as that altar call was given, and like I said, I don't really remember details. I don't even remember the context of what was like being said on the stage. But I remember all of a sudden I started weeping like uncontrollably. And up until that point in my life, I had never really experienced crying because of feeling like this sense of being overwhelmed with peace and with joy and with happiness. I'd never experienced that. Usually when you're a kid and you're uncontrollably crying, it's because you're upset, you got hurt, you're angry. But it's usually not because you're experiencing really positive emotions. So I remember sitting there and just weeping. And I now, as an adult, look back and I realize like that was the presence of God. I was just experiencing it so heavily. And that night I decided to ask Jesus to come into my heart, pray the salvation prayer. And I decided to dedicate my life to him. And that night really changed. I shouldn't say changed. It changed me, but it almost like, it feels like it set this trajectory for my life in some kind of way. Because I tangibly felt the presence of God. And some people may say, well, your parents manipulated that, or whoever was speaking manipulated that, but I don't agree with that at all. The church I was raised in was really a come as you are kind of place. I never once felt super pressured into my faith. I never felt guilted into it. And even with my parents, like my parents loved going to church and loved the Lord, but I never felt like my faith was being pushed on me. So a little background on my dad, because his role in my life as someone who believed in God and walked out his faith every day played a big role into my faith journey after loss and some of the complex emotions that I had experienced. So my dad, I think by the time I was like maybe in middle school, before I was born, he was professionally umpiring and then working at a company called Robinson Industries, I think was the official name. It was like a company in the town I grew up in that built fans and different things like that. And then by the time I got a little bit older, he had decided to go into full-time ministry. He was always doing this part-time, and doing ministry through the medium of sports and athletics. So especially baseball, of course. but he decided to go into full-time ministry. So that meant that he was becoming the president of an organization called Christian Sports International. And Christian Sports International was a Christian organization that was doing things like camps where they were training students in sports, athletics, like baseball, basketball, football, soccer. I think they even did like golf and BMX, like all the sports you can think of, they pretty much did it. And they were doing these camps in different spots all around the city of Pittsburgh, and it did eventually expand out to different states as time went on as well. But I remember as a kid going with my dad to some of the summer camps that they would run. And some of them were in parts of the city of Pittsburgh that were just really tough spots to grow up. Just the kids and the families were, really at disadvantages, and there was a lot of poverty, a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. And Christian Sports International would come into some of these areas and establish connection with churches in the area, and also get to know the parents and families and really spend the most time with the kids, getting to know them, encourage them, training them in different sports, and just helping them grow. And then also sharing about the gospel of Jesus with them. So in the summers, I got to do that a lot with my dad, and that was always really fun because I got to hang out with a bunch of kids and play sports. Most of the time is baseball and softball, so I got to do a lot of softball in the summers. But every now and then in the summers, there would also be the basketball camps, which were my favorite ones. But it was really cool because from a very young age, I got to see my dad not just talk the talk of like being a light to people, encouraging people and loving people, but I actually got to see him be that to people. And just as he was like that to other people and other kids and families, he was that same person to me as a child at home too. Man, that gets me so emotional. Because to me, it was always this reminder of like, I was just talking with someone about this, but relationship with God wasn't just some facade to my dad. And it wasn't just some showy thing to do these cool camps and feel, like some people want to feel seen doing these things, or they get on a stage and preach because they just love being noticed. But that was never my dad at all. And so I saw my father live and breathe the principles of what a life dedicated to Jesus was all about. And so I think that's also for me why my faith has always been so real. It's never felt fake. It's never felt like my parents' faith or anything like that. I think the authenticity of my father in his life and his relationship with God made a massive impression on my own walk with the Lord. So as a teenager, I started getting into helping out with the worship team in my youth group. I was always involved in my youth group every week. And then I eventually started helping and serving with the worship team on Sunday mornings at the church I was in with my parents. And I loved it. My whole life was very centered around faith and church. And then even when I graduated and went to college, I first studied church music because I felt like I was called to be a worship pastor, worship director at a church somewhere. And then I eventually switched my degree to ministerial leadership, which again, it's still like a theology degree. So I always felt deeply called to the church and being involved in it. Probably in my mid to late 20s, I was doing contemporary Christian music, and I was doing the artist path with that. I was with a label, touring and playing in a ton of churches, writing worship music, and the experiences were amazing. And since I was a child, I've always really experienced God very tangibly in my life. And I've always felt like I have heard his voice very clearly. And those years when I was in college, I started helping out with different worship teams even more, and I got to experience not just reading the scriptures and the scriptures coming alive to me, but actually seeing miracles, seeing people get healed of things. So my faith became even more alive to me. In my 20s, I had experienced God prophetically so much, so deeply in worship leading that I did, where just feeling like God is singing a certain song and then I sing that, and then you find out later oh, this impacted me so deeply because this literally was reading my mail kind of thing. And so all that to say, I guess, is that I've just experienced God move prophetically, move miraculously, and I've experienced the supernatural in my life a lot. I feel like I've experienced a lot of undeniable proof that God is real and he loves us and he's invested in our lives. So then 2021 came and my dad got sick, super sick. And I was really pulling on all the things I had learned in the last 5 to 6 years of before he died. So I was really pulling on how to pray for him, worshiping in spirit and in truth, and interceding. I believe that everyone has access to the spiritual gifts that God gives us, and they can tap into all of them. But I also believe that each individual has more of a strength in certain gifts. And for myself personally, I feel like my gifts that I'm the strongest in are intercession. I would say that's my number one. Feeling an impression from God of someone that needs prayer, or kind of feeling the weight of someone's burden and literally physically and emotionally feeling it. And praying into that, praying peace, praying healing, whatever I feel like God is leading to pray for. I'll even have, when I was doing tons of worship leading, and even still to this day, and now I'm starting to get back into it, I will walk into that Sunday service, into rehearsal, sometimes feeling this weightiness, and sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's actually a physical pain in my body that's not normal for me, or sometimes it's just some random emotion. And I used to get really down about that because it was just not natural for me to experience these kinds of certain emotions, maybe, or that physical pain or whatever. But then I started realizing oh, that's actually just this invitation from God to intercede for someone that's probably coming into the service. And most of the time, that's what it was. So intercession's a really big one for me. And then I would say another one that is stronger for me is the prophetic and prophecy. I've heard God all of my life. I've sought answers from God over very, very big things in my life, big decisions, like Jonathan, my husband, who I was about to start dating, and finding out is this the guy that I'm supposed to marry? And God was very clear with me. So crazy things like that, and even like big moves in my life, all these things, like I've always sought God for answers, and I've always heard God answer very clearly. And every single time I've followed that answer, everything has lined up without issues in my life. And that's not to say that there's not challenges in those things, but it's just like I couldn't have orchestrated this so perfectly. So I've heard God all my life. I am well aware of like the things he has called me to and the different spiritual gifts that I know he's put in my life that I need to steward, is the best way I can put it. And so back to when my dad got really sick, I was praying for my dad every day. I was singing over him when I was in the hospital with him, and even when I wasn't, I was just personally worshiping and speaking life over his body, speaking healing over his body. Like, I've heard testimony of people who were given a cancer diagnosis and their cancer just vanishes after being prayed for. I've seen legs grow out to alleviate back pain. I've literally had that happen to me, and I've seen it happen to others. Financial miracles that are just like, what? How could this be? That just come through out of the blue when someone needs it most. So I've seen God do the miraculous. I've believed in the supernatural very strongly since I was like in my 20s, early 20s, because my eyes really got open to seeing that God's just not, it's not just the Bible, but like God is, and it's not just like stories, but God is living, breathing, and invested in our lives. So when my dad got sick, I was pulling on all of that knowledge that I had built over the years and praying, asking others to pray for him. But the miracle we prayed for didn't happen. And he died. In the guilt and grief episode, I share really in depth about the guilt that I carried. And if you haven't listened to that, just to recap that really quick, almost 2 weeks before my dad died, his hemoglobin levels had dropped significantly. And they were doing a blood transfusion, looking for internal bleeding in his body. I went into the hospital that day to visit him with my mom. We each had to go in separately to visit him. And I was in there maybe a few minutes, if that even, and I was just starting to pray, talk to him, and sing to him. And I remember God clearly saying to me, pray over his brain. And I thought, his brain, why would I pray over his brain? I was like, oh, it must be his mind. He must be anxious. So I touched his head and I started praying. And then as soon as I started praying, I got the impression that something was wrong with his head, that the bleeding could maybe be happening in his head, and that I needed to tell the nurses. But I walked out of the hospital that day and I didn't tell the nurses because I was too scared. I was terrified. Long story short, a week and a half, 2 weeks goes by. My dad is not waking up from the sedative. He should be very uncomfortable. He's on the ventilator, like there's a big tube in his throat. He's not moving, not responsive at all. They do a scan of his brain and they find out that he had a stroke and he had a huge bleed in the whole back of his brain. So when I found that out and knowing what God had told me that day, my faith was rocked. I immediately was, one, just feeling completely guilty. Like, wow, this is all my fault now. I did know what happened. God told me. But then, two, I was just like, God, why would you tell me that if you weren't going to intervene? And that's still one of those questions that I have not gotten answered. But I think one day it'll come. But after that time, I just felt so much anger towards God. I felt so angry. I did not want anything to do with him. I had no trust in him. And I think the hardest part of it was that it wasn't that I didn't believe that God, like, I didn't believe in him. Like, I knew without a doubt in my mind that God was real. I've seen him come through in undeniable ways in my life and in others' lives. But it was that I didn't want him. I didn't want a relationship with him. And that really stung. It really hurt. Because so much of my life was built around faith in God. And it just felt like in a moment, like that was really starting to crumble. And everything that I thought I knew was just falling apart. So after my dad passed away, I was struggling really badly with my faith. I stopped going to church because I did not want to be in a room full of joyful people, and I didn't want to have worship songs telling me to raise my faith, or pastors speaking messages about things like that, or God is close to the brokenhearted, when he felt so far away. And I didn't feel anything. I just felt anger, and I felt numb to him. So about 8 months go by, and I kind of just, every now and then I would have moments of just feeling anger towards God and just being like, why, God? Why would you do this? Why did you tease me? I felt so teased. I felt so taken advantage of. Like, why would you tell me this? And why couldn't you heal him? I've seen you heal so many people and do way more miraculous things. Like, why couldn't you do that for my dad? He was a man that, like, dedicated his entire life to you. Like, who the heck are you to not heal him? That's how I felt. And I had one of those days about 8 months later, because this was just, the guilt was just eating me up inside. I would try to talk about it with my husband, and I would just feel horrible. Like, I feel like I just kept hitting a wall. I was hoping maybe one conversation with someone that has faith, like, I'm going to have a breakthrough moment. But I just kept hitting wall. And I so badly wanted to feel his presence like I once had. I wanted to trust him. And I wanted to love God again. But my guilt was so strong. And my anger towards him was running so deep. And I wanted to make my father proud, because I knew nothing mattered more to him than loving God, and especially seeing his kids live lives for God. And I wanted to live up to that dream that my father got to see play out in our lives. And I wanted to keep carrying that dream of his. but it just felt like nothing within me could do it. Because I lost all trust in him. And I was dealing with a lot of bitterness, a lot of unforgiveness. Unforgiveness at myself and anger towards myself, and also bitterness at just how all of this COVID stuff was handled, the different people in charge, at extended family members who were talking crap and treating my family poorly, and even just at strangers who had their opinions about COVID patients and didn't even know me. I was feeling so much anger and bitterness and unforgiveness. And I remember that day just sitting out by this big window we have in our living room. 8 months later. And I'm just like having another one of those why God moments. Not expecting a single thing. And I clearly heard God tell me, your dad wanted this. And I'm just like, what? Why would he want this? Why would he want to leave all of the grandchildren he loves, his wife, his children, this life he has built? My dad had so many friends. Why would he want to leave any of those things? And God said to me, because when he saw me, he just wanted to be with me. You know, leading up to that moment, I had been following several Instagram accounts that talk about grief. And one of the pages, I think it's called The Grief Gang, maybe. It's a podcast as well. But that week before, the girl who runs it had shared about how she had her own struggle with guilt. I can't even remember, all the story behind it. But she said in there, like, I had just come to a point where I realized, like, I can't carry this guilt anymore. Like, it's not fair to me to have to carry this. And that was the first time since my dad had died that I started kind of thinking about the guilt and the shame I was walking around with every single day. And kind of thinking, like, maybe I'm the one that's blocking any healing. And so, like I said, about a week later, then I finally heard God. I heard him. And that was the first I'd really felt God's presence and peace in months. Especially when you're someone that has had an entire life of knowing that and being very aware of that in your life. And to go months without that, it was so relieving. And I was trying on my own. To find healing, to read the books, listen to the podcast, do all the things, take the walks. I was trying to find healing on my own, and I wasn't finding it. Nothing was taking the weight of my guilt away. And to this day, I can only like mark that moment with God as a moment where healing actually started for me. And it wasn't until I decided to begin forgiving myself and others and begin letting go of that bitterness and anger towards God too and myself that I actually started to heal. And I actually started to experience like a tangible joy and happiness again in my life. It's literally the only reason why. I still don't know why exactly God told me that about my dad in the hospital. I'm a really big believer in if you want an answer from God, keep asking. Because from what I've experienced in my life, like I don't feel like God is out to confuse us. I think he's very clear. I don't think there's like ever ill intent. I think his intent is always good for us. So for that question, I will keep asking. And if I get an answer, I will let you know. But getting the answer about free will, the free will that my father had, was the most important answer to a question I needed to get. Because I realized then, oh, this is not all about me. That moment to me almost feels like what probably many Christians would consider like a rededication of your life moment. It did not include, excuse me, it did not include a salvation prayer. It did not include anything big and emotional. I mean, it was emotional, but it wasn't some grand thing. And I've found in my life, and especially after loss, like the most impactful moments I've had with God are when it's just these calm, quiet moments. Now, since that moment, it has not been all daisies and roses and rainbows. Every single day, walking with God is a choice that I have to make, and on my very heavy, griefy days, it's sometimes a struggle. But since that time, I now live knowing that God is with me and he is my safety. He's, as the girl in the family, I had 2 older brothers, and the youngest, my father was such a protector of me. I was most certainly like the daddy's little princess. And when that role gets taken from your life as a daughter, you go through so much struggle with feeling safe and protected. And it's not like this, it's not this physically protected kind of thing. My husband's an amazing protector, and if anyone tried to mess with me, I know he'd be like, no. But it's this emotional protection that you can only find in a father as a daughter. And it's kind of, I feel like as a daughter, like your confidence is really deeply knitted into that connection with a father. Once my dad left, it felt like that was gone. But I feel like I've been finding that again in God. And it was always meant to be found in God, but I feel like God gives us fathers to have that opportunity to experience his protection and love in that way as well, through fathers. But I find that in God. Man, this episode is shaping up to be long. I have a lot of thoughts on faith after loss. And so, like I said, my day-to-day is kind of this daily surrender, I would say, of just giving my heart and my life over to God, and also giving him my grief and giving him the space to tend to those emotions when they need tended to. I've struggled with going back to church for a while, and after our dog died and during that season of him being sick, because we'd have to be home and take care of him, take him to the vet, we were struggling to be in like a weekly church routine. And after he died, like, we still were struggling with it because we just didn't feel like at home in the church we were going to, though we loved it. And thankfully now, like, I just feel like we've hit a really amazing rhythm with a church family. And it's been really refreshing. Really, really refreshing. And that is alone a testament to don't give up on that. Like, it literally took me 4 years to find again. And I would say probably even longer. But any church service I've gone to since then has been really powerful for me. You know, when you witness someone going from life to death, it's a very sacred and spiritual experience. I talked about with my friend April in an earlier episode about how it's just like that veil between heaven and earth, where we feel like we are so far from whatever, wherever heaven is. And when someone passes and you witness it, it just feels like there's no gap. It feels like there's no veil there. It just feels like everything is one. And like the supernatural feels very alive. It's very weird, I know. And unless you've experienced it, you probably are like, wait, what? But it's just it's like heaven felt so close in that moment, even though I was in such deep sorrow. And even while I was pushing God away, it felt like supernatural things were happening all around. Some of them I noticed, some of them I didn't, because I didn't care at the time. The atmosphere felt very strong with the supernatural. And it felt almost like this outer body experience in a way. Probably partly the shock, but also it felt like something, like I've been in very wild kind of worship experiences where you just like kind of like, I could be there sitting and just praying silently, but like somehow I feel like I'm not in my body, like weird stuff, or just seeing miracles happen, or just being overwhelmed by the peace or the laughter of God. So I've experienced very like supernatural kinds of things, but nothing was like that moment of life to death. And every time I am in like the worship part of a service now, like once I started going back to church services, this happens, I can maybe count on one hand the amount of times I've not cried. But every time I am in a worship service, I literally feel like I can hear all of heaven singing with me and the congregation. And it's crazy and it's weird and it makes me cry every single time. It's also really humbling. But every time I am singing along with the worship team, and sometimes even now, like that I've been serving with our church's worship team, like I feel the joy of heaven. And I also just feel the joy of my Father. And I feel so connected to him. And when I talk about my faith and I look back on how hard every day was and how challenging it was to just feel like separated from God and to feel like I couldn't connect with him after a life of connecting with him, and to feel like he didn't care about me. And when I look back now from a place of my heart has experienced some healing, I see that he was always there. But my anger and my unforgiveness were pushing him away. And I know a lot of people that have faith before loss sometimes find themselves walking away. I remember my husband and I were somewhere in Texas filming something years ago. And the person we were talking to, he was talking about the deconstruction of his faith, and now he's like agnostic or something. And telling us all about that. And he's like, once you start, and my dad had already passed away, probably about 1.5 years at this point. And just saying, once you start like really, looking into it all, you really start going down that path and like really deconstructing your faith and questioning all your belief in God and things like that. And like, not a lot of Christians do it, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. Like, I have no problem with anyone sharing to me about their faith journey, whether they're still with the Lord or not. But I remember him saying that to me, and it kind of like, it rubbed me the wrong way, because he knew we were Christians, and I felt like in a way he was talking to me like I've not questioned anything at all, and that I've just kind of been spoon-fed whatever the church or my parents told me to believe. And I walked away from that, and I still feel this to this day of just like, man, if you only knew. I have walked that path of wanting to deny God and not wanting anything to do with him. And I just think, I guess I say all that because I feel like so many people just want to throw in the towel on their faith so quickly after traumatic situations happen. And I was one of them that wanted to. I wish I could stand here and say like, no, I kept my faith strong throughout that whole season of just deep sorrow and guilt and shame, but I didn't. But the thing I am so thankful for out of all of that is that I kept trying to hold on. And even when I didn't trust God, or I just thought, this is my last straw, I don't want anything to do with you again, if you don't come through on this, all that stuff. Like, I'm so thankful that he was always near to me. And he was always fighting for me. And that I didn't throw in the towel. And that because I knew and had experienced it in my past, that God always answers, that I kept asking. Because I don't know if I would be here today telling you all of these stories if I just gave up on asking. In 2 episodes this season with April and Natasha, we touched on asking God, like those why God moments, and asking if God gave answers to them. And they so bravely shared their experiences with that. And I feel like after those conversations especially, and just my own experience through loss, like I feel like the biggest thing I want someone to leave with from this episode is to not stop asking God why, and to not give up on that, but just to keep going after it. Even if you're struggling with your faith big time, or you have lost your faith and you don't have any relationship with God, I just want to encourage people to ask him. Truly, I did not know peace again until I asked and I got my answer. And of course, there's still going to be questions that I have that I've not gotten answers to, but God is not distant. He's not some big guy up in the sky just not invested in your life. He cares about you, and he wants to hear about the struggles you're having. And maybe some people would say, like, well, if he cares, then why doesn't he just take away the pain? From what I know about God and what I've experienced, is that he's never here to force anything on you. I believe he can just take away the pain, but he is a God of free will. He will always give you the choice. Always give you the choice. He actually wants relationship with us. And when I got to the point of allowing, or I wouldn't even say allowing, but just coming to the point of questioning, maybe I don't have to carry this guilt anymore. It was like all he needed to finally be able to soften my heart and to answer my questions, because my heart was way too hardened to hear an answer. My unforgiveness was so strong, and my bitterness was just eating me alive every day. But once I softened that a little bit, all he needed was a little centimeter. And he was faithful to answer. And he's still faithful to answer. I have seen God come through in amazing ways in my life, and amazing ways even after my dad has passed. I can sit here today having experienced a lot of healing in my grief and genuinely finding purpose and joy again, all because I decided to let God heal my heart, and I decided to stop trying to do this on my own. It's the only reason why. Truly. I tried for 8 months. Nothing was working. So, if you believe in God, or if you did and you're struggling with your faith right now, I just want to encourage you to keep holding on. He really is who he says he is. He's not some phony, and sometimes our bitterness and unforgiveness and depths of sorrow can make it hard for us to hear him. But he's always there listening, and he wants to answer you because your sorrow matters to him. It really does. And even more than all that, like he wants to heal your heart, because grief is way too heavy of a burden to bear all on your own. And I'm just so grateful when I look back. I cry right now because I truly am just overwhelmed with peace and joy and gratitude, because I don't know what my life would look like right now had I not had that moment and had I not kept asking. I fear I would have just been carrying the guilt and shame still, and I'm sure that would have just gotten heavier and heavier as time gone on. But I'm so thankful for what he's done in my life. And I'm so thankful that he's a God that answers us and that cares about every detail in our life. Whew, that was like heavy stuff. Beautiful, heavy stuff, but heavy stuff nonetheless. So I hope you keep asking God your questions. And I pray that you receive the answers that you need to hear. And even more so, I just pray healing over your heart and your life, and that you would know you can still carry the stories, the memories, and the legacy of your loved one with you, and at the same time you can experience joy and you can experience peace and healing again. We'll talk soon.
Watchers.